My next guest is an individual uniquely qualified to give us insights into what we heard or didn't hear from Robert Mueller yesterday on Capitol Hill. Dr. Corsi, welcome back to the show. It's wonderful to see you.
Great. I don't think it's streaming here on mine yet, or is it? I'm not sure.
It is. There's a little bit of a delay.
Here we are, yes.
Yeah. So what we're doing today, Doctor,
now,
is slightly unique.
And I want to turn that down. There we go. I'm all set now.
Wonderful. We've got a little bit of a unique broadcast today. It's the first simulcast you and I have ever done, and it's the first live stream video that you've done in more than a year. Isn't that right?
That's right. I mean, I was subpoenaed by Mueller on August 28th, 2018, 3 days before my birthday, and that's just about coming up to a year. And right after that, I pretty much quit doing the live streams because the special prosecutor was monitoring all of my live streams, and what I realized was that I was very quickly going to be, anything I said was going to be recorded, and I was going to have to talk about my live streams. The special prosecutor had everything. They read my books, they read my articles. I mean, they had probably knew more about me than I knew about myself. So I just quit doing the live streams. It seemed to be safer.
Right.
But I'm now I like this format, Jason. We've worked together, you and I, over now more than a couple of years.
2 years and change, yeah.
I think so, and I've, enjoyed the work you've done with Charles Ortel, which I think has been extremely good.
Thank you, Doctor.
And I think we'll try this format out. Maybe we can do these on a fairly regular basis. But it's nice to be back, and it's nice to have. I'm seeing we're getting some people joining us on my. From Twitter and from Facebook, and people are very kind here to say welcome back, and I'm happy to be back. I hope YouTube does not censor us like they've done before. We're fighting these battles with the YouTubes and the rest in the world. I think we'll ultimately win them.
Yeah.
But let's talk today about Mueller. I think that's really the subject today, and I'm very pleased, Jason, that you suggested we do this. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining me, Doctor, and it's a pleasure to see you back online. For people who haven't seen you in a while, it's important that I remind everyone Dr. Corsi has recently published a new book titled Silent No More, and this is almost a direct transcription of his personal diary, his writings, and everything that was happening contemporaneously while he was being investigated by Robert Mueller's investigative team. And Dr. Corsi, yesterday we got some insight into not only the investigation, but Robert Mueller himself. He seemed not only to not be in control of the investigation, he seemed to be totally unfamiliar with just key components of it. Were you as shocked as I was to see him?
I was shocked. I think the country was shocked. I mean, first of all, the Democrats had built this up. It was going to be the Mueller, this was going to be the movie version of the book.
Right.
And the Democrats really thought this was going to be what would roll them into impeachment, that they could get Mueller to affirm things that were in his report on the premise that the American people had not read the report. And what it turned out to be was a disaster. It was a train wreck. I mean, at any number of, I want to analyze it from several different aspects. Mueller's demeanor was horrible, and he looked old and devastated. I want to talk about that, but also the substance of what he talked about. And I think that it really undercut the Democrats' case. It also makes suspect why the written report was written in the first place. And I think that the light is going to get turned now on Weissman, who appears to me to be the likely candidate for the person who actually ran the investigation. I don't think Mueller was anything but a figurehead, if we assume his performance yesterday represented his mental state today, and it wasn't just an act to avoid things. And I've entertained that possibility too, which we'll discuss. But Jason, to answer your first question, I mean, right out of the box, the stuttering, he looked confused. He looked like he didn't know where he was. He even the way he held his mouth and the way he kind of fumbled his words made me think that he was really suffering some kind of a mental capacity, incapacity, that there was some mental deficiency. I mean, it would have worried me if I ever looked like that. I think I'd want to not appear anywhere, and I'd want to get some medical advice. I mean, I will be 73 years old this year, and so I'm really comparable to Mueller in age, but I'd like to think my mental faculties are quick, and I'm still writing books and still very active. I don't see that Mueller has the capacity to do anything right now but retire. And go off into the wilderness. I mean, he really looked to me to be a mental problem of some sort or other, dementia. I'm not sure what it was, but he couldn't respond quickly. He didn't hear things. He wanted questions repeated. He didn't appear to remember what was in his own report. He was lost, shuffling through, looking for pages. The whole performance was like, an older senile person that you just basically felt embarrassed to have to watch go through this. It was embarrassing.
It was.
And I have love lost with Mueller. I think Mueller has been a fixer for the deep state for decades, going back to his whole career in the FBI and then leaving the FBI and going to lucrative law practices, which he's done periodically. It's all the pattern of the deep state rewarding those who fight for them within the bureaucracy, making sure they get moneyed up. You see the same thing with James Comey being on the HSBC board and the Lockheed board. Comey and Mueller are each worth, I don't know, over $5 million, between $5 and $15 million. I'm sure their net worths are. And this is a deep state pattern. Going back to the Mark Rich pardon, to any number of the Clinton investigations where he has exonerated the Clintons and not prosecuted them. He's intervened in any number of investigations of the Clintons in particular. We took this trip with Hillary to deliver a uranium sample to Moscow, which we only found out through a WikiLeaks posting that was in fact one that was never revealed in beforehand. We didn't know he was in Moscow, but WikiLeaks published these cables that were stolen, probably I think by Chelsea Manning, and one of those cables documented that Mueller took this trip to Moscow delivering uranium for Hillary.
Doctor,
so
the
this,
investigation, sorry for interrupting, we've got a bit of a delay. The investigation was remarkably focused on WikiLeaks. We could even argue that their interest in you was an effort to get some kind of leverage involving WikiLeaks. Was this a vindictive campaign? You've written books about Barack Obama's birth certificate being a fraud. You've presented compelling evidence of Barack Obama being involved in the Down Low Club in Chicago. Was this an operation to round up enemies of the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas, and not so much the Bushes, but definitely the Obamas and the Clintons, and take action against you, against Flynn, anyone who's spoken out against them?
Well, in my book, I think, The Silent No More, which I wrote while I still thought I was going to be indicted by Mueller. Remember, the history of this is that September and October last year, I went through 40 hours interrogation with Mueller, voluntary. I brought them all of my computers. I gave them, they could bust down the door and take all this stuff. So I thought, well, we'll just hand over to them my computers, my backup devices, my email accounts, my cell phone. Mueller had everything. And when I could not give them the testimony they wanted. Their key point was that they believed I had connected Roger Stone to Julian Assange at WikiLeaks. This was their whole collusion theory, Mueller's collusion theory. And now I don't think it was Mueller's theory. I think it was Weissman's theory, and the three prosecutors, who were Aaron Zelinsky, Jeannie Rhee, who was the Clinton lawyer that kept being referred to yesterday, and Andrew Goldstein. Andrew Goldstein, by the way, sat behind Mueller all day yesterday. He was there for the entire Mueller testimony. He was right behind Mueller. The three prosecutors that interrogated me were the top team. This was the A team, and
as it were,
they were convinced that I was connected. See, they were operating. There's two things. One, they hated me politically. That became clear through the course of the discussions. They absolutely hated me politically, and despised my writings from a political partisan position. And secondly, they had a theory of the case, and I was there to validate their theory, to give them what they wanted, which was that I had connected Roger Stone to Julian Assange, except I had not done that. I don't know Julian Assange. I've never been in touch with Julian Assange or WikiLeaks. I've had no communication with them at all. But in July and August 2016, it was our 25th wedding anniversary. I'd taken a trip to Italy with Monica, my wife, and family. And that gave me time in which I kind of realized, putting the dots together, that yes, that's right there. You've got a picture of that's Andrew Goldstein, and you can remember he was sitting right behind Mueller all day yesterday. I was tweeting that out yesterday. So at any rate, I figured out that Podesta in July and August 2016 had yet emails from Podesta that he was going to release.
Assange did,
and
yeah.
Assange did. And, it's not entirely a logical deduction. I mean, I knew that Assange had released on July 22nd, 2016, 40-some thousand emails that hurt Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and there were no real emails in there from Podesta. I noticed that. I kind of did a forensic analysis of it. And Assange came out right after that and said he had more emails. Well, the way Assange described it, these emails were going to be devastating. They were going to be hugely harmful to Hillary. And Assange in July 2016 was saying they were Hillary Clinton emails. So everybody in the world decided they were Clinton Foundation, or they were the 30,000 emails that Hillary destroyed. I didn't think that, because I'd written a book on the Clinton Foundation, Partners in Crime. Charles Ortel and I had been working for 2 years, and Charles has done just brilliant work on the Clinton Foundation, and was the first one to bring to me the fact that the Clinton Foundation was a fraud. It's a hard story to get to the public, because if you don't know how to read financial reports, you're going to miss it.
Yeah.
I see people over here in the chat are being very nice. I really do appreciate people with the kind comments, and I'm glad to be back too. Good to see everybody. Good to be back on the YouTube. We're going to try to get back into a routine of doing more of this. At any rate, to continue
Doctor,
this narrative and answer your question.
Excuse me for just a moment, Doctor.
Yeah.
I want to let everyone know exactly what we're doing today. This is a simulcast that's happening both on Crowdsource The Truth and also on Dr. Corsi's YouTube channel. So people can go and search for Jerome Corsi on YouTube. And of course, Dr. Corsi has, now wait a minute, Super Chat seems to have gone away. I'm not signed in. So people who are watching us right now, Dr. Corsi, on your YouTube channel can help support you financially through Super Chat. And people can also go to your website, CorsiNation.com. You still have an ongoing legal battle ahead of you, so I want to thank in advance our viewers who will be visiting CorsiNation.com and helping the doctor fight the deep state in this battle of lawfare that Robert Mueller and his corrupt team of prosecutors have brought to you.
Well, thanks for mentioning that, and also it's also a matter of supporting income at this point, because I lost all of the employment I had over this Mueller investigation. Yeah. I lost all the consulting jobs. The hard left went to all the people I was consulting with in Washington and threatened to expose that I was consulting with them. I lost all my income as a result of Mueller and have not restored it.
And that was his goal,
That's
wasn't
been
it,
one.
Doctor? It's an attack on you from every angle, financially, legally, your reputation was assaulted. Their intent is to destroy you, irrespective of the facts related to their allegations.
Yes, and they were vicious about it because when I said, look, I don't have a contact with Assange, they would not accept that I had come to these conclusions by myself in July and August 2016, that Assange had Podesta's emails, and I was telling people this, telling Roger Stone this, telling a whole group of people. And they were reading my emails. I'm sure I think that the federal government has been monitoring me since 2004 when I co-authored Unfit for Command.
Right.
I believe I've been under NSA surveillance, and I'm pretty sure I was under FISA court surveillance. And what I say in Silent No More was that as I went through the 40 hours with the Mueller team, I did become convinced that they were partisan in their pursuit of trying to impeach or find crimes on Donald Trump. They were absolutely uninterested in anything I had that might have shown Hillary Clinton had been colluding with the Russians, or that the Russians did not give the emails to Assad. The prosecutor said, well, Dr. Corsi, we're just not interested in your theories about who has the emails. So this was the prosecutors had a storyline they wanted me to confirm. And they had all this evidence. They had everything, all my emails, which I voluntarily gave them, but I think they already had everything. They had my telephone conversations. They even seemed to know the content of my telephone conversations.
Yeah.
And they were leaking things to the press.
Totally. Doctor, it was interesting that when you shared with us a couple of weeks ago at the Citizens Grand Jury that detail pertaining to FaceTime, that the FBI or the investigators felt they had you somehow cornered because there was this FaceTime call with Ted Malek, and what you revealed shockingly in that testimony at the Citizens Grand Jury was that the FBI claimed to not have the ability to spy on these FaceTime calls. So perhaps they presumed there was something of substance in that communication with Ted Malek and that they were going to shake you down until you told them about it.
Well, see, the very interesting thing about all of the way they approached this was that the prosecutors had an agenda. They weren't usually an investigation. It's about legitimate law enforcement investigation. You begin with a crime,
right,
and then you develop facts. You investigate, and those facts lead you to certain hypotheses, which can produce probable cause evidence going to an indictment. The Mueller investigation was completely backwards. They started with a guilty party. They knew that Trump had committed treason by being an agent of Russia, and now they were going to find evidence to support that theory. And anyone who could not give them the evidence that they wanted, they easily put into these perjury traps because they would ask you a question. I forgot constantly about emails that I had. Yeah. I had to amend my testimony. But when then they got angry at me, and and this is all in Silent No More, the book, when they wanted me to, they were going to indict me unless I pled to this one count. Well, the one count was the first day's memory mistakes when they'd allow me to amend that testimony. And Rudy Giuliani is exactly right on camera when he says constantly that they produced a script for me to read, and if I gave this lie to a judge that I had committed this crime, then I would not go to jail. And that's suborning perjury in my book. What I said was, look, I did not knowingly and willfully give them information I knew to be false on a material subject with the intent to deceive them. That's the crime. I didn't do that. So I could not imagine myself standing in front of a federal judge with my hand on a Bible, swearing that I committed a crime that I knew I didn't commit. And the key point was when my wife Monica, we're going through this because they were spending a lot of money on lawyers. You could spend a couple $1 million defending yourself if I was indicted. All I have to do is plead this one count, and then Mueller says that they'll recommend no jail time, and it's kind of like a easy solution. Well, Monica woke up and said, she would rather visit me in jail the rest of my life than have me not be the man she married. Well, that was the key point for me, because I knew at that point my faith is very strong, and I couldn't swear before a judge on a Bible to a crime I hadn't committed. As I rehearsed that in my mind, I got so far, and I said, look, Judge, I didn't commit this crime. I can't do this. So, I didn't have to. But I knew then that Mueller would want to come after me vindictively, and they never did indict me. Because I think when they went through the review of the file, they could see I had not lied. Yes, constantly, they had an 8-inch thick book on me sitting there. And they would ask you a question, and then they'd pick out one of those, something in the 8-inch thick book, and they said, well, this disagrees with what you just said. So, that was the trick that they had with this perjury trap, and anybody and everybody would fall into it. And what I was trying to do was to, not with any agenda, but just to give them straight what I remembered to be the case. And my memory was very bad after 2 or 3 years. I had 60,000 emails in my computer. I couldn't remember 60,000 emails from 2016. It was impossible.
Now, Doctor, you're describing this trap that they're trying to put you in. And of course, as you're realizing this, you certainly would have no reason to trust that the deal that they were offering was necessarily a deal that they were even going to honor. They could have gotten you to plead guilty to this thing. And we've just learned from Michael Barden that once you've entered a plea, saying anything contradictory to that becomes virtually impossible. And so they could have just said, well, you pled guilty to this. You've spoken about your various securities licenses that you would have had to lose, and they told you wouldn't. So it seemed like there were a lot of points that they were lying to you on. And the performance that we saw from Robert Mueller yesterday almost causes us to put any investigation he's ever done under new scrutiny.
Well, I realized that they were dishonest to begin with, because they wanted me to plead to testimony they had allowed me to amend. Now, that's completely fraudulent.
Really?
And I had my attorneys ask, well, when would I be sentenced? They said, well, maybe it would be a year before I would be sentenced. Well, I knew if they would own me in that year. If I said anything or did anything, I could never have written the book Silent No More. Couldn't have written it. I could never have done any television or radio interviews. They would have owned me. And then they would have told the world that I had lied to the government. Well, of course, if I swore before a judge that I had lied, they would be right in saying that, but I hadn't lied and I wouldn't do it. So I knew they might bring me to trial. I knew we might lose everything, my family. I knew I might be spending the rest of my life in jail, but I said, if that's what it takes, I'm not going to swear before God to a crime I didn't commit, so put me in jail the rest of my life. I said, and I went actively on radio and television.
Yeah.
It was on Fox. I was on with Trish Reagan, who was very good to bring me on. Hannity was extremely good. Tucker Carlson. I was on even MSNBC and CNN. I went on all of them, did a lot of radio, wrote a book, Silent No More. And I've written another book, which will be out. I've just finished it. It's going to be on the coup d'etat.
Great.
And that will be out in probably December or January. It's I'm now, the book is in copy editing. I've finished it. And what Mueller's testimony was yesterday confirmed that I'm right. The entire investigation was completely fraudulent. And my book, this new book, will show that. Because, for instance, I think that this started with the Obama administration wanting to do surveillance of Trump virtually from the moment he came down the escalator in 2015 and announced he was going to be a candidate. And I do believe that this was a spying operation on Donald Trump, and I think I can prove that in the new book. But where Mueller was so disappointing yesterday was, just take any line of questioning. The idea that he said in the report, and I think this report was written by Weissman. That's my best guess, with help from the staff, because this whole issue of exoneration, and those questioning the GOP congressman questioning Mueller on this issue of exoneration, it is not in our legal system that
Right.
the prosecutors exonerate anyone.
Right.
You either prosecute or you decline to prosecute. You never say our standard, we're not guilty until we're proven innocent. We're never required to be exonerated, because again, you can't know everything. You can't be 100% certain that a legal system, every person could be accused of a crime, but the point is the legal system demands that the prosecutors prove it.
Yeah.
And prove it in front of a jury.
Doctor, this may be one of the most serious points to come up out of this whole entire matter, because yesterday, throughout the testimony, they kept coming back to this notion of, did the report exonerate the president? This is a ludicrous topic for them to even discuss, and any responsible lawyer, lawmaker, prosecutor, whatever it is that Robert Mueller considers himself, should have predicated any answer by saying what you've essentially just said. There was no need to exonerate. This report is not intended to exonerate. We never in this country have a situation where law enforcement seeks to exonerate someone. I mean, he withheld exculpatory evidence. That's also a gross violation of prosecutorial etiquette. But the notion that, they basically socially engineered the public now to think that Trump needed some form of exoneration to be not guilty of these false crimes they've accused him of.
Well, and also the suggestion that Rudy Giuliani is making, especially in my case, that they were essentially trying to suborn perjury.
Yeah.
They're trying to write a script, read this script, you'll stay out of prison. Well, that script was a lie. I would have had to admit to something I didn't do. I did not lie to them, giving them false information, etc., with the intent to deceive them. I did not intend. How could I intend to deceive them? I handed over all my computers, everything.
Yeah.
I handed over my life to them, all the information that was relevant in my entire. I withheld nothing. Okay, and they knew that because the prosecutors didn't have a search warrant on my home. They didn't burst down the door like they did with Roger Stone and Manafort, or with Cohen. Said, you guys want to see it? Let me give you everything you want. I'm not going to withhold anything because basically, first of all, knew I had nothing to hide, but I wanted to make it clear I was not withholding anything. I wanted to make it clear that my intent was to tell the truth and to, assist them. But I could not lie if they required me to lie to assist them. I had to draw the line there.
I think you've just said something very important, Doctor, because this is a very predatory type of prosecution. And what you've just said, I think, is what most people listening would feel. They would go into some sort of a court case and they're confident that they didn't do anything wrong, they didn't do anything criminal, they're not going to lie, they're just going to tell the truth and they'll be all right. But prosecutors like Andrew Weissman, Robert Mueller, Aaron Zelinsky, they almost rely on that, and they know that there's a certain naivete in terms of understanding the law, the legal procedure, and the practical application of these type of charges that the average person has no experience with. And as you're describing, when the FBI comes to your house, when you're subpoenaed by the U.S. government, it is absolutely natural, normal, and almost unavoidable to feel a tremendous amount of pressure, fear, the financial pressure that you're under, even if you haven't done anything wrong, to be dragged through the mud and to have your family subjected to all this. You've mentioned Monica many times, and she deserves our praise. She's an incredibly brave and strong woman. She's been by your side throughout this, and that's got to be commended, incredibly admirable. But this is exactly what they're trying to break. They're trying to put psychological pressure on you. I'm sure they'd like nothing more than to see your marriage fall apart, your life fall apart, so that you're left in a desperate situation with no choice but to give them what they want.
Well, it does test every relationship in your life. Suddenly you're under a strain with, are we going to lose the house? What's going to happen to me as a child asking, and I'm talking about adult children, but you still Are you guys going to be okay? I mean, and the strain between me and Monica in terms of working these issues out, talking about strategy, having to, really get into what the issues were. This was a political, in a political prosecution, you're going after an enemy basically for political reasons. And you're going to presume that this charge of Russia and Russia interfering in the election, which has not been, okay, so the validation, there's been two separate sets of indictments by Mueller's team on Russians. First of all, these Russians, the individuals named, are not coming back to the United States to face trial. There'll never be a trial. That indictment is never going to be tested in a court. Secondly, in both of the indictments, if you read the press releases from the Department of Justice, they carefully state that there is no evidence any American citizen participated with Russia. They're mostly posting things on social media, and the press releases from the indictments also say there's no evidence it changed any votes. There's no evidence this Russian interference made any difference. So what's the massive Russian interference threat to our democracy? It's a false argument, but it's one that Donald Trump can never. If the standard of proof is exonerate yourself, well, then they say, well, we just haven't looked hard enough. In fact, there's articles out today saying that, well, we just haven't looked hard enough. If Mueller maybe failed. Maybe Mueller was an old man and he couldn't handle it. And now it's time for Nadler and for Schiff to continue the investigations, and they'll find what we know to be the case because we know Donald Trump is guilty. See, that's the presumption of guilt, which is completely opposite from the way the the English United States, back to the Romans.
Yeah.
Our judicial system is based on a fundamentally different standard, and that is you're innocent and the government has got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a courtroom, a jury of your peers, that you are in fact guilty. If they can't do that, then you're innocent.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean, that
basic rights, Doctor, upon which the country is founded. People should be, even people who dislike Donald Trump or dislike me or dislike you or dislike Robert Mueller, however they feel about that, this is an issue that every single person in the United States of America should be gravely concerned about, because we're not talking about some distant coming, oh, if this or that doesn't happen, this could be the outcome. This is happening. This happened to you. You're experiencing this in an ongoing way. Your finances, your career has been destroyed. Let me ask you this, Doctor, specifically about the testimony. You having been subjected to questions from this very team, seeing Mueller there refusing to answer questions, saying this is out of his purview or he's not familiar with Fusion GPS. How did that make you feel personally to see him when the theme of the day is that no one is above the law, but yet Robert Mueller sits here with no consequences, able to lie, mislead, and avoid questions? How did that make you feel?
Well, I mean, first of all, I was very happy to see Mueller do so poorly, because in the theatrics, the optics, the Democrats lost massively yesterday. No one watching Mueller could view him as credible. You might pick out, through questioning, he said this, and we're going to capture onto this one statement, and that's still giving his life. That Trump could be prosecuted after he leaves office. Well, that's ridiculous. Not going to happen. And yet it's in the narrative, the political narrative that the hard left wants to do, weaponizing our justice system, which is extremely dangerous, utilizing our intelligence services in a way that Richard Nixon and the Church Committee in the 70s never thought was imaginable. And of course, the left hated it when Richard Nixon used the intelligence services to go after the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, John Kerry's organization, or the left did not want the anti-war movement scrutinized for its ties to the nation's enemies by our intelligence and justice system. That was the whole point of the Church Committee. The whole point of why it's so disturbing and upsetting that Martin Luther King was investigated for his sexual practices by the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, that's again outside our bounds, and the left was right to object to all of this. But yet today, the hard left is encouraging the weaponization of our justice system if it's going to get Christians and conservatives. And that's extremely dangerous, because that's the beginning of a totalitarian system that ultimately backfires, and the system will and does turn on the very people who created it. And they don't realize that. They think it's just going to wipe out all the racists and the xenophobes and these other people whom they hate, with no understanding of the First Amendment whatsoever. Well, this is the problem. If you can presume somebody is guilty and demand that they be exonerated, you've turned the justice system upside down, and you've invited it to be weaponized to imprison and ultimately silence and kill people you politically are opposed to. This is what I went through.
But that is
now,
totalitarianism defined, isn't it, Doctor?
Yes, and I think from the beginning, in my writings, I have been so right on in exposing this. My book, Killing the Deep State, which is still selling extremely well, was a New York Times bestseller. And I think that book, I wrote that book 2 years ago, but it has in it things that are being revealed today, that we're finding out today are true. You know, in terms of how this deep state, the Comeys, and how these people really created this narrative of the and that the Russians stole the emails, which I don't think the Russians did. I think Assange has been very clear that it was Seth Rich who stole the emails, and I think our government's case against Assange is a very poor case. I wrote my dissertation at Harvard in 1972 on the Pentagon Papers case, and I think as a publisher, you had the right of Assange to publish Chelsea Manning's stolen material, even if Chelsea Manning stole it, because that's where the Washington Times and the Washington Post, rather, the New York Times in 1971 were able to publish the Pentagon Papers, a Pentagon study stolen by Daniel Ellsberg, a defense analyst working for the RAND Corporation, which is a defense industry contractor, was then too one. And that study was extremely damaging politically, because it showed from the early days of the Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson and Robert McNamara knew the war was a sham, that we weren't going to win it the way we were fighting it. Yet they allowed 50,000 Americans to go to their deaths in Vietnam on a war they knew was a lie in terms of its fundamental predication to the American people.
It's really the same thing we're having today, isn't it, Doctor?
Yes, and today our government is trying to punish Julian Assange for the publication of stolen emails. Now, you know, the theft of the emails is a crime, and Assange did not steal the emails. In fact, the indictments the government has brought against Assange have nothing to do with the Democrats' emails. They have only to do with Chelsea Manning, in this case from 2010, which, again, I think most people don't understand. And this is the first time I can think of in my lifetime where the government is actively determined to punish criminally someone who publishes stolen documents. Now, you know, again, publishing the stolen documents is not a crime. It would not have been a crime if I had gone to see Julian Assange. I just didn't do it. I didn't think it was, I thought it was basically, I was willing if Ted Malloch wanted to, or anybody else wanted to. If Joseph Farrow, my employer, had sent me an airplane ticket and said, it's part of your job, if you don't go to see Assange, I'm going to fire you, I'd have gotten on that plane and seen Assange. But, you know, I didn't need Joseph Farrow to buy me a ticket. I could buy a ticket to London. First time I was in London was in the 1980s. I've been to London dozens of times. I get myself to London if I want to, and I can pay for it. But the point is, I didn't see any point to it, because Assange had given a lot of interviews, and he was not going to give away the total story of the emails he wanted to use for his October surprise in 2016. He was going to keep that for his own advantage, to use the way he wanted to use, and he wasn't going to share it with me.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was a waste of time.
Now, Doctor, let me take you back for a moment to yesterday's testimony from Robert Mueller, because there were some really key things that occurred that I'd like to get your response to. Were you shocked when he was asked directly about Fusion GPS and he responded that he's not familiar with that?
In part, I thought, I kind of said, now, that's so shocking that he doesn't know who Fusion GPS is, because I think anybody reading the internet and the press reports on the Steele dossier knows all about Fusion GPS, knows all about, Perkins Coie and the law firm that Hillary used to launder the payments from her campaign and the DNC. They know all about this. That Mueller didn't know who Fusion GPS was is either, a fundamental lapse of memory, which would be, indicative of perhaps dementia coming on. Maybe it's Alzheimer's. I don't know what, but that kind of a memory lapse is highly irregular. Or I thought Mueller understood that, with the investigations going on from Barr and from Durham and the Justice Department, he's trying to set up his own defense so it doesn't come back onto him for criminal misconduct in the way that the Mueller investigation was conducted, because he is ultimately responsible for that, even if he, was just a
figurehead.
A figurehead.
Yeah.
He had the responsibility for it, and it was shocking. So I thought either he was dodging a question by pretending to forget, or actually couldn't remember, and for different reasons, each of those were problematic. He was senile. He shouldn't have been in the position of managing an investigation this important. Mm-hmm. If he was trying to dodge that he didn't know what Fusion GPS is, it's even more indication of how fraudulent the use of the Steele dossier was, and the fact that this is going to reveal what I think my next book proves, and that is that this was a coup d'etat. And it was an attempt to overturn a legitimate election by a group of intelligence agencies, and including international, and justice agencies, including the FBI and the Department of Justice, that decided that they were in charge of the Constitution, and they were going to write the election the way they wanted it to turn out. That's not in the Constitution. That's treason. And the ultimate offense that Mueller might have been concerned about, which would be a rational explanation for his bad performance, was that dementia could be an excuse or defense for treason. And I think I'd rather plead dementia than, eventually that's going to have to be medically validated too.
So wait a minute. So this is interesting, Doctor. So this is, you've proposed the notion, and I think this makes a lot of sense, that perhaps Robert Mueller recognizes that the jig is sort of up, and he's doing damage control now. If he can publicly establish that he has no idea what's going on, perhaps he'll be exonerated, for lack of a better term, of any wrongdoing.
Yeah. Please let me take my cane and see if I can find my way out of here, because I want to go to the old soldiers' home where I can drink some soup.
Right.
Don't prosecute me because I can't remember what you're talking about.
Wow.
That's the only. I thought either he really has dementia, either he really is mentally incompetent, in which case, if Weissman and the others took advantage of that and decided they were going to run the special counsel office and just let Robert come in and say, Robert, it's time for lunch. Why don't you go have a few drinks at the bar?
Why would they need him?
That's what they were doing with Robert.
What would be the need?
Just figurehead. It's cover for them. Weissman could act under the cover of Mueller, thinking that Mueller would be blamed for things that Weissman was doing. Mm-hmm. If you want to do prosecutorial misconduct, you want to have a fall guy.
Blame it on somebody
else. The fall
else.
guy wants to pretend he's demented. Let it be Robert Mueller. Now, I don't know if that's the case. The guy might actually be suffering the mental disabilities that were evident yesterday.
Or he could
even when he looked at pages, he stumbled and couldn't remember that conspiracy was the common sense understanding, the legal understanding of the common sense term collusion.
Right.
So he stumbled for that and couldn't come up with the word conspiracy.
Yeah. Yeah.
contradicted himself, said he, it had to be pointed out paragraphs in his report where he said exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
When he was looking at paragraphs of his report and didn't seem to comprehend what they were about. I mean, these things were shocking in their demonstration of mental incapacity.
He really
How did he
seemed
get
like
there in the first place? I mean,
yeah. He seemed like a student who showed
how
up
did he show
having
up that
not
morning?
studied for the test.
No, he seemed like somebody suffering from Alzheimer's who doesn't recognize their family.
Yeah.
And doesn't, that the walls are kind of getting shaky and they don't know where they are and they're confused about everything, but they have lost the ability to rationally remember and think.
Right.
He exhibited early characteristics of dementia, as I said. If that was not feigned. Now, if it was feigned, he did a very good act. And what I would want to do if it were me, I would want to say, okay, Mr. Mueller, now we're going to go through a little bit of mental testing here because we can put you through some mental tests in which you're not going to be able to feign dementia. Because we can monitor what's going on in your brain. We can figure out whether you really do have dementia or whether you're feigning it.
Right.
And that became a question for me watching him. I mean, I'm probably, as an investigator, naturally suspicious of everything and think I'm being lied to most of the time. So this, again, was interesting to see Mueller behave this way because I knew it totally undermined the Democrats. And if he had been running that special prosecutor with the intent, 17 lawyers, all of whom hated Donald Trump, and he's saying he didn't understand that was a bias. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really impossible to accept at face value.
Well, he's basically admitting that he's not very observant if he doesn't realize. I mean, this is totally unbelievable on its face that people who he worked with through Enron and knew from the Department of Justice, that he did not know their political biases. It's as if I invited you on the show and claimed to not be aware that you don't like Andrew Weissman. I mean, that'd be a little silly.
Well, see, the idea that he hired all these anti-Trump lawyers, including Weissman, and he didn't have a single person there who was not politically biased, that he found out about Strzok and Page, couldn't even vaguely remember when he found out about them being so biased, and that he dismissed Strzok when it was exposed, indicates to me that he wasn't mentally incompetent at that point. He knew that he had to fire Strzok, and ultimately Page went back to her office in the Justice Department as a lawyer, but he knew he had to get rid of the two because the political damage was so significant. Well, if he could calculate political damage then, maybe he's still capable of calculating political damage, and it'd be better to stutter, look old, not know where you are. You need help. He got there. How did he get there? He put his tie on the way he's always put his tie on. How did he do that?
Yeah.
He had his big briefing book with him. Who gave him that? I mean, it to me doesn't fit together.
Yeah.
But I know that from the theatrics of it, from the point of view of the political agenda the Democrats were trying to achieve, that crashed and burned. And all the things that Mueller evaded on were the key kinds of points that Barr is going to have to, and Durham are going to have to focus in on. In other words, he professed no knowledge at all of the Steele dossier and how it was used. Didn't want to talk about that. Didn't want to talk about the $10,000 that was offered to Papadopoulos in Israel. Where'd that come from? Didn't want to talk about Mifsud, this professor from Italy who, I think is a Western intelligence agent too. He didn't want to talk about any of the emerging dynamite topics that are ultimately going to blow up the entire conspiracy that occurred starting in 2015 to destroy Donald Trump and make sure that Hillary came in here. I mean, I think this was Obama said he was going to do a fundamental transformation of America. And I think they realized they needed more than 8 years, but 16 years of Act Two being Hillary, and Hillary being, Obama was in a Saul Alinsky organization, but he does not seem to be the hardcore, dedicated leftist Marxist radical that Hillary is. Hillary did a thesis on Alinsky.
Yeah, and
I think Hillary was so
him.
close to Alinsky, so close to him. I'm wondering to know, how close was their relationship at this time? I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
So this idea that Hillary became Saul Alinsky, and when you read about Hillary and Bill before she got into the White House and decided she better learn what cosmetics were, she looked like a hard left activist.
Yeah.
Dressed like one,
Bit of
presented
a
herself
Patty.
like one, talked like one.
Yeah.
And was ideologically was one. She still is.
Doctor, I think you and I could do quite
he
a
set
number.
the stage. He set the stage. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry about the delay.
Yes.
I think we could do quite a number of shows about Barack Obama's ties to the Weather Underground, Bill Ayers, Bernardine Dohrn. This is a rich topic that hasn't been explored to the extent that it deserves, but we just have a few minutes left. I want to quickly ask you, Doctor, we've been speaking quite a bit, and many people have spoken about Andrew Weissman's possible role in the investigation, but I haven't heard quite as much in recent days about Rod Rosenstein. Now, isn't it true that Rod Rosenstein had suggested to President Trump that he remove James Comey, and then somehow the removal of James Comey triggers this appointment of the special counsel? Feels a lot like Rod Rosenstein was setting up President Trump in the same sort of way that the prosecutors attempted to set you up as a cog in a machine that was intended to crush Roger Stone and subsequently Donald Trump.
Well, Rosenstein is going to come under investigation. There's no question about it in my mind. And his role in engineering getting Mueller appointed special counselor. By the way, Mueller saying he was not interviewing for a job with Donald Trump in terms of the Attorney General. I think the White House can produce quite a few experts to refute that testimony and show evidence he was applying for the job of Attorney General, which he didn't get.
Mm-hmm.
I think also, you've got the entire narrative is going to begin crumbling in the next few weeks and months. It has been to those of us who've been following it very closely, and I think it's going to continue to crumble. The narrative is really one. The deep narrative here is how the Democratic Party has become, first of all, a socialist party, but it's headed to being a communist party. And the plan of the Communist Party of the United States to take over the Democratic Party, which traces back to Hawaii in the 1950s, we should do a series of shows on that.
Yeah.
I've done an ebook on that. Because that's the deep story here. The deep story here is that the Democratic Party is now a democratic socialist party, and their intent is to rip up the Constitution.
See, I'm glad we're having this conversation, Doctor, because the ties to Hawaii, it just brings me back to what I suggested earlier, which is that all of your research into the birth certificate, there's a ton of intrigue surrounding that document and how it came out of Hawaii and what Barack Obama's affiliation with Hawaii might be, universities over there, et cetera. So there's quite a bit for us to discuss there. The last thing I wanted to get to while we still have
I want to make
minutes.
one more point.
Sure, please.
Let me do one more point. I also think it was very brilliant of Barr to keep Rosenstein along. And this was kind of mentioned in passing yesterday, because Rosenstein also affirmed that the Mueller final report did not make a conclusion on obstruction. Refused. It wasn't say they did not say, and Mueller's amending of this testimony was important yesterday. They did not say if he weren't president, we would have indicted him. No, they said this evidence is not conclusive enough for us to be able to make a determination, because yeah, Trump did exhibit a lot of angry behavior. He stormed around, say, fire this guy, do this. No one did it. And the investigation, Mueller's investigation concluded without it being impeded. It's very hard to argue that, except for a few outbursts, Donald Trump did anything to really impede the investigation.
Yeah.
And keeping Rosenstein there until the very end and making Rosenstein affirm the acceptance. I'm sure that Barr came in and said, okay, Bob Mueller, what have you got? And when he realized that Weinstein wanted to continue the examination into Donald Trump's, family, Barr said, you don't have probable cause to go there, and he shut it down. Because I think there was a big change from the moment Barr came on the scene.
Yeah.
And the second point I want to make is that, the deep story here is not just the coup d'etat, but the fact that this was a hard left using Barack Obama and using Hillary Clinton to be the catalysts to transform the United States ultimately into a communist country. And it is our universities have been producing leftist students. All of the identity politics are the prelude to a leap into socialism, which then is a leap into communism, government control of our lives, totalitarianism. And that's the real story here. That's the real story that needs to be exposed.
Yeah.
And when you see a prosecution where Mueller presumes you have to be exonerated, this is the beginning of the kinds of prosecutions we saw in the Cultural Revolution under Mao, where people were prosecuted and put in thought reform camps because they didn't agree politically. And my disagreement with my refusal to accept the plea deal, it's first of all, I'm conservative in my politics. They hate that. Mueller did, the team did. And secondly, my belief in Jesus Christ and my Christian faith, which they hated. So both of these, and I do believe it was my faith ultimately that got me to say to Mueller, take a hike. Because the practical solution in all the pressures I was under was just plead this deal and make a deal and be a little bit of a criminal, but it'll go away and you'll get a pardon. Well, I said, I'm not trusting Donald Trump for a pardon. I'm trusting my life in Jesus Christ and the fact that I'm not going to swear to a crime I didn't commit. And that was the bedrock of my decisions. Well, I'm sure Mueller hates that. Yeah. And I'm sure targets me for the rest of my life as being an enemy of the leftist state. But one of the things, I decided, I've taken some time and I'm now still kind of rehabilitating myself, but in writing a new book, I'm intending to continue in the time and the years I have left to try to preserve the Constitution and preserve Christianity. I see Christianity under attack worldwide. I see the forces of globalism and totalitarianism getting stronger in the EU while it's under threat of disintegrating. And these are critical moments of time. The tide is going to turn one way or the other. And, God will intervene. I've written books on that. My book on the Battle of Bastogne is all about that topic. But it's going to take us to do something first. So we've got to stand up for these values and the Constitution and freedom of religion and freedom of speech. Otherwise, they will be lost.
And each of these things are under assault right now, Dr. Corsi. There's been tons of censorship in social media. We're almost under a corporate form of socialism.
If we do a series of these interviews, Jason, these are the deeper themes that we've got to explore.
Yeah.
And getting into the background of this and explaining to people how this all came to be is the deeper explanation. Now, of course, YouTube may censor us before we get too far. They may censor us after this one. We'll see.
I've got a solution
for that,
Doctor.
I've sued Mueller, and I'll be happy to sue YouTube too if they decide that they're going to do censorship.
Absolutely.
I'm done. Now it's time to fight.
Right.
It's time if we don't fight for our values and not be intimidated by the powers of the state, that's the only way we're going to win. It's the only way we're going to preserve this nation for future generations and our freedoms.
Yeah, and that's critically important, Doctor. I, for one, would like to thank you for what you've done. You've stood up, you've shown incredible resolve, incredible bravery. So many people would not have the personal resolve, the faith, the family structure that you've got that allowed you to do this. It's so monumental. I can't reiterate it frequently enough. And earlier we did have people asking about the ongoing suits that you have against Robert Mueller. We don't want to talk about that right now. They are ongoing. Everybody has seen you on the show with Larry Klayman announcing the lawsuits. And when there's something to announce in the future, we can come back to that. But for now, Doctor, we're just about out of time today. I do want to thank you for joining me and remind everyone who's watching that you can also see a simulcast of this broadcast on Dr. Corsi's YouTube channel. And if you want to make your way over there right now, before we wrap it up, you can still get in a super chat for Dr. Corsi. People who want to financially support the doctor and sponsor him can make donations on CorsiNation.com. Right at the top, you've got a little click here to donate tab. You can also purchase any of Dr. Corsi's books at your favorite retailer. His most recent book is Silent No More. Of course, he's written many New York Times bestsellers. Doctor, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show and get your insights. Your knowledge of history and the politics in the United States are invaluable, and I definitely want to explore more of these topics with you. Thank you so much, Doctor, for giving us those insights, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Jason. Same here, and God bless, and thank you very much. And
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
the audience for being with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Corsi, and thanks everyone for watching. Don't forget to tune in tonight at 7 p.m. We're going to have another episode of the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. That's going to be on Patreon and Subscribestar, so we'll see you there tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching, everybody.